everybody. Hello and good evening. My name is Emma Griffin, and I'm the Managing Artistic Director of Manus Opera here at the College of Performing Arts at the New School. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to tonight's CoPA Conversations. The Conversations are a series of curated talks between two artistic innovators drawn from our world-class faculty and selected guest artists. Today, from our faculty, I am delighted to introduce my colleague, Missy Mazzoli. Missy has been a member of our composition faculty for a few years. She's had her music performed by the Kronos Quartet, LA Opera, Eighth Blackbird, the BBC Symphony, Cincinnati Opera, and many others. In 2018, she became one of the first two women to receive a main stage commission from the Metropolitan Opera, and she was nominated for a Grammy Award in the category of Best Classical Composition. She's currently composer in residence at the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, and from 2012 to 2015, she was composer in residence with Opera Philadelphia. Currently, she's working on a new opera, The Listeners, which is a collaboration with playwright Jordan Tannehill, librettist Royce Vavrick, and director Lileana Blain-Cruz. And that's going to premiere in 2021 at the Norwegian National Opera and also Opera Philadelphia. So I would also like to offer a warm welcome to our guest speaker this evening. Joining us is director Lileana Blain-Cruz. She's based in New York City and Miami, and she's worked at theaters across the country, such as Atlantic Theater Company, Theater for a New Audience, LCT3, Signature Theater, Soho Rep, New York Theater Workshop, Oregon Shakespeare Festival, Public Theater, Opera Omaha. She was recently named a 2018 United States Artists Fellow and awarded the 2020 Lincoln Center Emerging Artist Award. Additionally, she is one of the resident directors for Lincoln Center Theater, and she is currently working on The Listeners, a new opera with Missy Mazzoli. So welcome to you both. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Before we begin, I do want to remind our viewers that we will have a Q&A at the end of the session. So if you have any questions throughout the conversation, just please put your questions in the chat, and then I will funnel them to our two speakers. Thank you guys so much. Welcome. I want to start off and ask you both to talk about The Listeners, this new opera that you're both working on. I want to hear about what it's about and your involvement in it. And then I would also love to hear you both talk about what it's like to collaborate, because I believe this is a new collaboration for both of you. So I hand this off to you guys.
Sure. Hi. Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.
Maybe I can start by just saying how this whole project began. So as Emma mentioned, Lileana and I are deep in the middle of this collaboration on this new opera, which feels like a crazy thing to be doing in this circumstance, but it's been amazing. Personally, for me, it's the thing that's like kind of kept me going through quarantine. So it's been amazing to have this big project that'll happen after, hopefully, this is all over. And this project began, quite a few years ago. I had just finished my opera Breaking the Waves for Opera Philadelphia, and they said, we want to commission you to write a new piece. With my librettist, Royce Vavrick, who's been my longtime collaborator, we've worked on 4 operas together so far. And I had this sense, I had a couple ideas, I had this sense that, so much of opera is adaptation. And which I understand, and that's fine. And it's been true about opera since like the beginning of opera. It's always been adapting plays and stories and books, and now up to movies, and even operas that are really well known as operas. Sometimes we forget that they started as plays or something like Carmen. But I really thought, this can't be opera's greatest destiny, to just tell stories again. Or even to reinvent stories. There has to be some story out there that has to sing first. It has to come into the world as an opera first. And so I kind of put this challenge to a playwright friend, Jordan Tannehill, who's a young Canadian playwright. And we said, Royce and I said, we would love for you to come up with a couple stories that we can see if we can turn one of them into an opera. And it was amazing because we gave him a sort of grocery list of like stuff that we're interested in, or stuff that I'm interested in. So I was like, I like cults. I like stories about middle-aged women in extreme situations. I like stories that are set in America. I like stories that have dictators in them. So it's like all this whole like list of things. And he sewed some of them together into this story that has become the listeners. And then Royce turned it into a libretto. And I'm at the end stage of now writing the music. I'm just doing the orchestration. And so the story that Jordan came up with, it's a story of a community in a southwestern US suburb. So I always picture like a suburb of Vegas, something that's been like irrigated to within an inch of its life. And like, it's not supposed to, no one's actually supposed to live there in the desert, but like people have made it work. And it's a community in which certain members hear a mysterious noise, this thing they call the hum. And this hum plagues them day and night. And that was another thing I told Jordan I was interested in. I said, my favorite Wikipedia page is like the list of unexplained sounds. And like, I could just like often just go to that page. And I'm like, what haven't I heard yet? And so he came up with this off of that idea. So certain people in the community hear this mysterious noise, and a community support group forms to help people deal with the hum. It's run by a very charismatic older man, and who the people just love him, but it quickly takes on cult-like dimensions. And his relationship to the group becomes increasingly sort of predatory. And so the story follows a woman, a middle-aged woman named Claire, who gets drawn into this cult. And then in the end, when it's revealed that the leader is a fraud, and he doesn't even hear the noise, I'm just giving away the ending to you.
Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert!
But you can spoil opera and people still come.
I know, that's amazing.
That could go wrong. But when it's revealed that he's a fraud, this woman, Claire, takes over the cult. So that's sort of the story. And Royce and I, when we were trying to think of who we wanted to direct this, our ideal person was someone who came out of the theater world, really, more than the opera world. And we always, like, we really felt that, and still feel that, theater, it's like always kind of a couple steps ahead of opera. And it's just, sometimes it can be lighter on its feet often, and can respond to things in the world a little bit faster than like the sort of behemoth of opera, which takes years to like get anything off the ground, if you can ever do it at all. And so we immediately thought of Lileana, and it was sort of like, it was the easiest sort of discussion we've ever had about director. We're like, oh, obviously. It was, and we knew that she had just directed a piece at Opera Omaha that we were really interested in. It did really well, and so we knew that she could take on this crazy medium, and would also bring a sort of new energy into the room. And it's been amazing. And she assembled this sort of dream team for the opera. So we're really, really thrilled.
Yeah, that's amazing introduction, Missy, breaking it down. So guys, like, I don't know about you guys, but we've been on Zoom meetings all day. So I'm gonna try to like make direct eye contact so you feel like I'm in the room, because theater, theatricality, I miss it so much. I'm a theater girl, director, but I've music has been part of my life growing up in New York and Miami. It's been like a combination of like music and performance. And I just want to credit, Adam Rigg, because I'm still a newbie. I'm a newbie to the opera scene, not going to deny it. And Adam was like, Missy, you have to know Missy. Like, look up Missy. Like, you're behind the times. Get with me. So then immediately I'm like listening to Missy. I'm like, holy shit. And then, I see Proving Up, and I'm like, this is everything that I want, always and forever. And so it felt like a wonderful match. And it's been a pleasure working with both Missy and Royce on this music, because one of the things that I feel like you don't always get in theater is the sense of like the epic, right? Like there are certain kind of limitations. And what opera, I feel, does in the most incredible ways is it takes all of the theatrical elements and then it expands, it like grows with this kind of amazing music that Missy has composed in relationship to this amazing story that Royce and Jordan have put together, so like that's been thrilling. You get everything but like magnified, which is thrilling.
I'm muted. So Lileana, I'm going to ask you a question first. As someone who has also sort of started in the theater world and ended up in opera, what has anything surprised you in working in opera? Has anything been really, unusual or surprising, or has it felt like an easy transfer?
I feel like there's always, it's funny, like you realize how much, so theater, like your origin point is the text, right? You're looking mainly at like language, and you're understanding language in relationship to theme, in relationship to location, in relationship to feeling. And you're in some ways like responsible as a director to think about tone, right? And with opera, music is in some ways like it's a whole nother it's like two books happening simultaneously, right? And so you're reading the score and you're listening to the music, and that's providing so much information that sometimes isn't necessarily spelled out in the text, right? So as a director, your responsibility for understanding what that motif means on the stage, you know what I mean? And like how we receive it, how we listen to it has been one of the like wonderful Easter eggs for me as a director. I'm like, haha, that means something. You know what I mean? When the music does that thing, I'm going to speak so uneloquently about music. I hope you guys are so excited about it. Like when it does that, you know, that thing where it swells and it does that crazy thing over there, like that, you know what I mean? Like emphasizing that, finding the energy that's already present and manifesting it on stage is something different. Whereas in theater, I might create that, you know what I mean? Like I might work with the sound designer to figure out how to get this, you know, let's say this kiss, you know what I mean, to be this magnificent event. You're looking for that, but that's already exists in opera, you know what I mean? And so now you're trying to find a way to manifest what's already happening in the music in the most exciting, visceral way on stage. So for me, it's like, you know, working on opera is like, you know, like they call it, you know, when you're working out, it's like the Olympics of theater, right? Because you're like, you got more people, you got a bigger stage, you got a bigger space, you have, you know what I mean? Like sometimes multiple languages, you know what I mean? You have the musical language, you have to kind of have all cylinders firing at the same time, which is, I think, very exciting.
Great. Missy, I want to ask a question about the content. So, I mean, this sounds amazing. And I'm also obsessed with I'm excited to hear and see this opera because, you know, these towns that have these crazy hums that no one knows where they come from, like, that's fascinating. Is it, in terms of the cult quality, so when did you guys start working on this?
Wow, like, it's like 2017.
Oh, wow.
We approached Jordan about, because we knew we wanted to get on it soon because it was an original story that had to be created out of nothing. So I think that was around when we asked him to write something.
And I don't even know what I'm trying to ask, which is like, is it weird to be working on a show about cults right now in today's political climate? I guess is what I want to.
Well, I mean, it's funny, like not just the political climate, which is sort of like all the ultimate cult right now. But you know, when I sort of came up with this, and I was like, oh, I'll go on Netflix and do some research and just, you know, find some documentaries on cults. It was like, here you go, here are 25,000 documentaries on cults, and it was like all of a sudden it was in the air. So like everything from, you know, Going Clear, the Scientology documentary, which felt to me very sort of like a metaphor for a lot of things that are going on in our country, and this relationships that play out and I want not just Scientology, but sort of I realized in doing all this research that all cults sort of follow the same pattern in their growth and in their demise. And that to me, and no matter where they are, who runs them or who's in charge, like they all sort of come together in the same way. They have the same sort of dynamics. And they all sort of fall apart in the same way. So that's something that's really interesting. And like also the NXIVM cult, you know, just all these people, it just seemed to be something that was really in the air. And certainly like in terms of how it relates to what's going on politically, like the role of the power of a charismatic leader to prey on people who feel lost and unheard. And you know, so much of the language that this guy in the opera, his name's Howard Bard, and Howard says to all these people, you know, I see you. No one else does, but I do. And like, who doesn't want to hear that? I want to hear that. Like, I'll join that cult. It's so attractive. And that was the thing that surprised me in the research, was realizing like how just really seeing how attractive this language was, and understanding how attractive that situation could be for someone who's lost, or someone who doesn't have a family, or someone who's been kicked out of their family. Like, it's really, I think that's true of what's going on politically too.
Right. Can you guys talk a little bit about collaboration? I mean, this is the first project that you two have worked on together, right?
Yes.
Have you had any workshops? You must have had workshops. Have you guys been workshopping? Well, then there was a global
pandemic times. What has it done to our feelings?
So did you like Zoom workshop?
We've had some great like conversations around like dramaturgy. There was a really wonderful workshop at Opera Philadelphia. Was that like in last fall? Was that a year
last
ago?
December.
Last December, crazy. And it was kind of amazing to kind of hear the first act out loud, and I think that became like a real impetus for conversations about like what's happening, what it is, you know what I mean, where it's going to go, how's it going to be, and for me, like I'm super excited about story and psychology, which is I think so like embedded inside of this work in particular, and thinking about Claire and thinking about Howard, and thinking about like the way things progress as we get into the second act. And that was, thrilling to talk to you guys about and think about. And, just to continue on this theme of feeling lost, it's like, it's one of the things that like so excite me about this opera, is because like that feeling like remains, you know what I mean? It doesn't matter where you are in time, like people feel lost sometimes, like loneliness is also a pandemic apparently in America, like where we're feeling lonely and alienated. And so like that question of like how people prey on that and the results of that, and how it's a product of the way our culture is built, is also really exciting for me to dig into thematically.
Yeah. And my favorite part of making opera is these conversations with the director, actually. And these little things that Lileana will say can like spawn all these amazing musical ideas. And I think it's like the mark of a gifted director that, they know what to say to make you feel like you've had this great idea. It's like, no, that came actually from what Lileana said, but I'm like, yes, this is going to be amazing. And it's really set the work free. Like for example, this one character, Claire, ends up having a sort of relationship with one of her students. And just in terms of like who that student is, like my conversations with Lileana really crystallized that, and making sure that we heard from him enough, and it's just really, it shapes the music itself, which I think is something that not everyone who makes opera realizes. And I think opera has this idea that everything's like siloed, and that the composer delivers the work, then the director takes the work and then does whatever they want. And I don't work that way at all. So this has been a really fruitful thing, even over Zoom. It doesn't take much to have like that kind of spark together.
Sorry, I should just keep myself unmuted. So Lileana, you as a theater director, as just a director, you've worked on older texts, living playwrights, new work, the whole thing. Can you talk a little bit about the pleasures of new work and what that asks of a director? Because you're also, when you're directing a Shakespeare play or a Chekhov play, like it's really you in the room. And then there's like some dead ghosts wandering around. But when it's
those are powerful though. You'd be surprised. Sometimes they're like, "Hey, girl, watch out with that one. That's a tricky one." Over there.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Well, and you just did. You just did the Fefu with Forna? I bet that was quite a ghost.
Yeah. But like you're talking about the main thing, right? It's the people in the room, right? Yeah. It's like that's the joy, that's the pleasure. Like getting to live inside, Missy's imagination is like, yes, tell me more about these cults and why they're so fascinating. I feel like that it's also, there is something special about making something in real time. You know what I mean? Like we are alive in this particular moment. We are responding to the presentness that we are in. You know what I mean? And so like for me, like working on older texts is an attempt to try to find a way to make that story feel necessary for now, right? Like, why are you telling this story now? And working with Missy, there's no, why are we doing this now? It's like, oh, I understand exactly why we're doing this now. And it becomes a question of how to tell that story most viscerally, you know, like, and that's what I feel is kind of thrilling about the new work development, is that it's alive and real and interested in contemporary existence, you know?
Yeah, totally. This is another question that it feels so open-ended, right? So we're living through this pandemic. It's super weird. It comes with this very constantly shifting ball of challenges. It's impacting the performing arts epically. Do you have a sense of how the pandemic has changed your approach to this piece specifically? Or, I mean, Missy, you spoke a little bit about like how it was sort of keeping you engaged. Like, do you have a sense of that? Or, I would be so curious to hear.
I mean, I just got weirder and weirder throughout this whole pandemic, and that is going to show up in the work. Like I'm like sitting at my desk where I feel like I've just been sitting here for 7 months, and so, you know, a lot of what I was doing was I went back to even stuff that I had already written, and I was like, you know, this isn't weird enough. Like I'm going to go weird. We're in a weird time, and a lot of it was like the cult ritual. So the cult in this piece will be played mostly by the chorus. You know, this form of people is most of the time they're on the stage, they're the cult. And so thinking about like the rituals that they do sonically, I finally had time and space and quiet enough to just like really go into a strange place with all that. And to think about them. So there's also some, I don't want to give that part away, but there is some like also like call and response, you know, so like the cult leader will say one thing and then they'll all repeat it in a really strange way. So this idea of just like accepting whatever is fed to you from your leader, your master, and saying like, yes, that is the most amazing thing, even though this dude just like made it up, you know, like, so, that's been really interesting dynamic to explore that I don't think I would have gone into had this all not happened.
Right. It's true. I feel like some of the most satisfied artists I know right now are composers and writers. And because you guys spend a lot of time thinking about the work. Lileana, for you, I mean, I'm sure you're really missing the room.
Yeah, man. Fall is hard. Fall is, you know, summertime, I think there's a kind of, at least in the theater season, there's a kind of like disbanding. We like know that like summer is kind of like that last moment before we kind of rush together again and start to gather in the fall. And I had a very visceral response to like, I'm like, my body was ready. It was like gearing up. It's like start of school, start of the season. And I was like, I'm not going anywhere. You know what I mean? Like, I'm still inside. Like you physically miss bodies, you know? So again, I feel similarly with Missy, like the excitement I am feeling about knowing like it's something I'm tethered to, that in January I'll have the ability to like actually be around other human beings is so, you know, galvanizing. And it's like really kind of saving my life right now, because it's true as a director, like your medium is people, you know, like you work with designers, you work with everybody, but like the work gets made in the room, you know? And so being able to have that chance to manifest it is really exciting. And of course, like with COVID, there are interesting challenges. Like, for example, keeping people a certain amount of meters apart on the stage. And what does that do? Like, how does that affect your idea of what it meant to kind of gather as a cult? How do you make that part of the dramaturgy of the production, right? So like, has Howard implemented some strange rules about how they have to be kind of like on a grid-like pattern together? You know what I mean? Like, how does that manifest in like her manifestation of chaos in the classroom? Like, it presents like sometimes the restrictions that get placed for like situations like that make you have to come up with creative solutions that you wouldn't ordinarily have had to think about. So that's been interesting to wrestle with, how to make that feel charged as opposed to awkward.
Right. Yeah. How to like dig into the choice. Totally.
Yeah.
And I think you articulated something really beautiful. I know I have felt, and I know a lot of our students have too, which is that, fall is such a transition point, and, it's so baked into your sense of school and your sense of event and the shift. And when that didn't shift this year, it was really unmooring.
Yeah.
And, similarly, I was like, no, we're good. And then fall didn't change. And it was a very strange experience. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask you guys two questions. I would love you both to talk a little bit about your career, sort of where you started and the, strange journey that got you to here. The other question I'm going to ask at the end of that, it's something I ask my students every single week to tell me, which is I'm so curious what you've seen or heard or read or watched in the last month that you got really excited about. Like what is bringing you, joy and delight these days? I feel like I'm asking everybody I know this question. So I'm just gonna like lay out those two questions. Lileana, you wanna talk about sort of your career and and the routes that you took?
Sure. Yeah. It's always funny. Like, where do you start? I was a child. It was a stormy night in New York City.
I know.
I mean, I will tell that quick story though. Like I was 8 years old and my parents were going through something crazy and my dad surprised us and we were like all getting in the car. My mom made sure we got all dressed up and like we had no idea where we were going. And then we pulled up to like Lincoln Center and we like ran out and we were late. And so we were like running into like the orchestra pit and we're like, my mom was like, you bought orchestra tickets? Like I hear them fighting in the back, like you bought orchestra tickets. And then like I'm running down and the like chandeliers are rising up and the curtain is the biggest I've ever seen. And we're sitting down and I was like, what is this? This is amazing. My brother immediately like passes out because it's dark and warm. And then the lights come up and it's like, it was like La Traviata, you know what I mean? It was like the big red, like Zeffirelli, I guess, set. And I was just like, what? Like, there was something so theatrical about that whole opening that like stayed embedded in my bones that I didn't even realize. And I feel like that has stayed with me, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize it. I thought I was going to be like an English major. You know, I studied English at Princeton, and I somehow randomly ended up in an acting class. And then I was like, oh, this is interesting. That's fascinating. Oh, I don't think this is for me. I'm more concerned about like, are the lights off? Let's turn off the things. What props have you got? What's your character motivation? I was more interested on the outside perspective. And then I had some kind of wonderful opportunities and fellowships after school. So I worked at Arena Stage. And then I came back up to New York and just saw as much as I possibly could. And I realized that, you know, sometimes directors have that catch-22 where everybody's like, come on, like, I'd love to see your work. And you're like, but I need a chance to show my work. And you're like, but yeah, show me the next thing that you're doing. And I'm like, if nobody's going to give me that, like, how do I show you my thing? So you end up self-producing, which was great for a little bit, but I realized I, you know, had enough experience assisting that I wanted to, you know, I didn't have necessarily a community in New York of artists that I could like build with per se. I was, you know, working alone. So going to grad school was a big kind of formative experience for me to like build a community of actors and designers and relationships to kind of manifest that after school. So after going to school at Yale, then, you know, like the career kind of started to take off. I worked, you know, at some of the theaters that you described, but it was somewhat curvy because I came late to the idea of theater in college, but like, you know, those kind of initial moments of childhood delight and excitement, you know, that kind of stays with you. And I feel lucky that I was able to pursue that and continue that. Yeah.
Did you always see yourself as a storyteller?
I mean, if you consider like, I mean, I loved consuming stories, which is what brought me to English, you know, and I always had like a fascination and love of language and theater because it was so easily accessible. Like I just happened to stumble upon like an audition sign. I didn't even know what an audition really was. I was like, okay, I'm going to read this monologue out loud. This seems fun, you know, like they look like they're having a good time. Like there's a kind of coincidence that then I pursued because there was so much joy and love in those rooms, you know? So I fell in love with the medium because it also contained all of the other mediums that I loved. You know what I mean? It contained visual arts, it contained music, it contained movement. Like you can synthesize in a way that was exciting to me. And also the communal aspect of it, right? Like that there's an audience, and from that becomes a conversation, whether that's, you know, sociological or political or personal. You know what I mean? It allowed for a kind of delving into multiple universes that was really exciting. It was like basically story in 3D, and that was thrilling to me.
What's bringing you joy these days?
Man, so it's not as joyful as it is painful, as I'm going through it very slowly, but there's this TV show, I May Destroy You, that is like so incredibly well made. But I'm like, gosh, damn it, this is hard. Oops, I'm cursing. Hey guys, sorry about it. But it's really like devastatingly.
Isn't it? It's remarkable. Yeah. Great. But you're right. It's hard. That's a hard. Although there's joy in how well it's being done.
Yep.
Like true. I feel satisfied. I'm like, yes, it does have that feeling. As painful as it is, it does still have that feeling of like. Yeah. Cold glass of water in the desert.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool. All right, Missy, will you talk a little bit about your sort of route?
Sure. Lileana's was so like succinct and uplifting. Really hard to follow her doing anything.
No.
Yeah, you know, I mean, like it's interesting hearing Lileana talk about how like, you know, directing sort of encompasses all the arts. You know, you get to access poetry and visual art and philosophy and people moving. I don't know, it's like everything. I feel that way about composing. And even at a super young age, like when I was taking piano lessons, realized I was not going to be the world's greatest pianist. And I wanted something that allowed me access to all those other things, even when I was a kid. So finding composition was like the first big revelation of my life. And I felt moved by music in a way that I noticed that other people were not necessarily. Like my parents were like, oh, and I was just like, no, but this thing and this chord, you know, I was just obsessed. And in a way that was like really unusual, I think, for a kid. And I've just held on to that, you know, and studied composition all the way through. I went to Boston University, you know, studied a little bit in Amsterdam, and then actually also ended up at Yale for grad school. And it's interesting though, like when I look at, I mean, that all makes it sound super easy. There was like so many, it was so many tears and like, what am I doing? And like feelings of like feeling inadequate and like, I don't belong here. And, you know, it was super rough, but I just like kept clinging to that sort of obsessive love of music. And when I moved to New York right after grad school, and like really with this like classic combination of like no money, no job, no plan. And I was like working in the Whole Foods as a checkout person, and like but I finally had this community of people, which and that is also what I've sort of clinged to in moments of despair, is this really incredible community of artists and composers. And now it's just expanding all the time to include people from all these other disciplines, thanks to opera. And I think that, you know, finding, in 2012, I became composer in residence with Opera Philadelphia, and had sort of applied to it, excuse me, like not even really knowing what that meant, or not even imagining like how I would write an opera. I applied to it because it was like health insurance and a salary, and I wanted to do something in Philadelphia, which is where I'm from. And it ended up just like completely changing my life. I remember we had like this program called Double Exposure, where they would connect you with two different directors, and you would work on, like, you would write a scene, and then like two different people would direct it. And I was sitting there, one of the directors they hired was Daniel Fish. And we were sitting there together, and he points to a singer, and he's like, what is going on in this character's mind right now? And I'm like, well, let me tell you. And it's like, I've been waiting decades for someone to ask me that question. And like in that moment, like I'll never forget it, because I was like, oh my God, I'm like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And it was like all these roads in my life, like all these different obsessions finally met in opera. the story again, storytelling, poetry, um, everything like just sort of met in this one art form. And it really was like this feeling of coming home. And I still write lots of other music and still perform and do lots of other things, but I feel like I've come home in working in opera. Um, so yeah.
That's great. I remember when you got that at Opera Philly. And did you write Breaking the Waves there? Is that the project that came out of that?
Yeah, yeah, it was interesting because it was a 3-year position, and then, sometime I said I didn't wanna write anything during the first year because I felt so, going back to feelings of imposter syndrome, I felt so inadequate with opera. I was just like, there's this whole tradition that you don't really study it, in most conservatories, actually. So it's like
Oh,
it's this thing I had to sort of pick up along the way, and, or I think that's changing for composers, but
mhm.
usually you're not really immersed in opera in school. And so I the first year I just immersed myself in the repertoire, and then the second year I was like, I think I'm gonna write something, and I think you guys should think about commissioning it. And so, which looking back was like the craziest thing, but like, it ended up really working out, and I'll always be grateful to them for supporting me before anyone knew that I could write an opera, including myself.
Yeah, that's great. So, for you, what's bringing you joy? What is in this quarantine time when we never leave our houses?
Yeah, well, it's funny, in the first couple of months, I was outside of New York. I went to stay with a friend in Westchester, and, I just watched all of High Maintenance because it was like this guy biking around New York City.
It's a love story to New York. I love that show so much. Yeah.
Oh,
So good, and, like, he's so cute, and, like, I just was like it was everything that I needed, and I just made me feel connected to New York and, like, people, and I was like, "He's going into people's
right,
houses." Like, remember when we can go into people's houses?
right.
And and then also I've been, watching all the, slightly more arty side is I've been watching all the Hiroshi Teshigahara films, so, like, Faith
Oh,
Mother and Women
yes.
in the Dunes, and,
Woman in the
it's
Dunes
just
is
like
amazing.
every shot is so gorgeous. It's
That
like
stuff is so good.
unbelievable. So that was a new thing for me. I'd never seen them before, so,
Oh,
yeah.
that's pretty good. Those are good.
High
Um,
maintenance in face of another.
so, and this is another thing that I feel like this is a conversation I'm having, with my husband and all of my friends, which is it's not so much what does the future hold for us, because I don't know that we can't possibly know that, but hopes and dreams. I mean, we are, we're in this moment where the performing arts are changing, and some of the changes being enforced on us by the pandemic. And then I also feel because of the pandemic, some of the change is coming from pressure from the artists, which I feel like is exciting. And what are your hopes and dreams for what might be on the other side of this very long now? Do you think for I guess for opera, for theater, for performers, for young artists out there?
Liliana, do you have any?
I know it's a tough one.
I mean, there's so many. There's so many. I think, um, like obviously, we're in a moment of recognizing the catastrophic ways in which the way this country has been built on the backs of Black people, and recognizing the trauma, like something about the clarity of the pandemic making visible for those who are maybe distracted or not able to see that pain and devastation, being able to see it, and so that clarity, I think, is creating opportunities for change, which I think is great, because if there's any reason why, I make theater, it's to wrestle with why we are the way we are, and why the world works the way we are. And that sometimes has to deal with, questions of power, structures of power, and what that means, and how those systems work in all of their complicatedness, and so I hope that means that people's voices that maybe had been suppressed or hadn't been heard now continue to kind of come to the forefront. That's exciting to me. I feel like there's also, I feel like in light of like illness and like the go mentality that sometimes like manifests in like living life and working, like that's being questioned in a very real way. Like that very American idea of like, if you're working, then you're good. And if you're not working, then you're worthless. Like that, that whole premise is like being like thrown up in the air, right? And it's kind of like actually like there's a sacredness to our bodies. There's a sacredness to our health that we're actually all super fragile, right? And so how do we continue to make space for actual life and living, and like health and care and family, all of those things that we realized were so delicate and fragile in this particular moment. Like I hope that on the other side we make more space for that care. We make more room for taking care of ourselves and not at the expense of product,
Yeah. Yeah, Missy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I see so much change in the opera world, and it's not surprising because things were really like not progressive.
Like, no, it's due. It's like 20 years late.
And even, not to bite the hand that feeds me, but I think I have to be able to, and most of us have to be able to like hold two realities at least. In that, even thinking about the Met, it's bittersweet to have been one of the first two women commissioned in 2018, and it's like a little bit like, okay, on the one hand, it's a dream of mine. I've wanted to write for the Met since I was like 15. And on the other hand, it doesn't make sense to me if I'm the last, if Janine Tesori is the other woman who's commissioned, if we're the last two women to be commissioned. So it's like, but now, and even in the last month, they announced 3 new commissions of Black composers, 2 of whom are women. And so it's like things are moving in a much better direction very fast, but it's because like that's the only way they could go. So I think there's a lot more intentionality and a lot less ability for these organizations to sort of, and I'm speaking specifically about classical music, but I think it's everywhere, to like pass the responsibility onward or say like, we didn't have any composers of color apply, so we don't have to hire. It's like, no, you can't. Doesn't that disturb you that like, that all these people feel excluded from your world? And you need to seek these people out in a very intentional way. So I'm happy to see that happening more and more. And I like seeing something I try to bring to my teaching is a sense of vulnerability. It's like there's so much, again, specifically in the composition world, there's so much like genius worship and like this idea you have to, that you can never cry and don't sleep more than 4 hours a night. And it's like all this stuff that is not true and that nobody does. And like I have students coming to me even now and they're like upset because they have to use the piano to compose instead of just like sitting on their balcony writing things in their mind. I'm like, I have never once composed away from the piano. And it's like, who are these composers who are telling these kids that you have to just be able to think of everything perfectly in your mind? Like, that's not the way that art is made. And so I just see so much, there's so many opportunities to get down on yourself. And I do think in this pandemic, there's been a more of an attention to making that, or just in the last 6 months, for many reasons, more attention into making that less, it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to not, to not have it all figured out. So I think that there's some real positives coming out of this.
Yeah.
Just like really shining the light on the way that people truly live and the struggles that they really have. So yeah, I'm very hopeful.
That's great. I mean, I think that was beautiful. I mean, I'd love to hear you both talk about this idea of, let me rephrase it. Certainly in my own life and career, I have in the last couple of years really been thinking and trying to pull apart this idea of the solitary genius, which directors get the solitary genius, composers, conductors, which is also a lot about the way that these rooms that you guys have been talking about function sometimes. And I have been really heartened because I do think one of the things that's happening as a result of this pandemic is we are interrogating this idea of the solitary genius, where, and you have both said this so beautifully, like, I think it sounds like the thing that got you both interested in your art is also collaboration, that it is not a solitary art, that you are in rooms with people who help make your work. I don't know, Lileana, can you talk about that a little bit? Because I again, only for myself as a director, I know that power center can get tricky, but also wanting to bring a spirit of collaboration into the room. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree. Like, I'm sure we all know the like director stereotype of the very serious, like director who's like sitting in the corner and it's like has the brilliant, and like, you have to work hard to hear them, and then they just have like the one, I don't know. I feel like I've encountered, I'm like, come on, speak up. What are you talking about? What's happening? Like, we're human beings, and I'm again, being interested in power, I'm less interested in one source, because I understand that the event doesn't happen without everybody's kind of full commitment and like participation in it. And I guess for me that comes from a space of love, because I think everybody who's making things is somehow like miraculous, right? Like everybody in some way has to put themselves into the process, right? Like it costs something to like compose, right? You are literally putting something that is deep for you out into the world. It costs something for a singer or an actor to kind of perform, and I don't think that cost is negative. I think it can be rejuvenating, you know what I mean, when it's shared with an audience. But sometimes process can be exhausting, right? And so when you enter into a room understanding that this is a soul work, right? That we're all being asked to put, like, literally, like, I feel like the best work when you go into like a performance and you leave feeling activated and alive, it's because people have like put themselves out there for that, And when you walk into a space and you honor people for that work and you take people seriously for that work, then there's a room of mutual respect, right? Because I'm not better than you, you're not better than me. We're here in collaboration to make something that is bigger than ourselves for the people that are essentially going to watch it, right? Because we're interested in that engagement of the whole, And so when you come in with that intention, I think that can open up a room towards the effort it takes, and it makes the process, I think, much more joyous and fulfilling, as opposed to one of like manipulation or struggle like that. Like, I want the struggle to be about the work, you know what I mean, as opposed to the struggle to be about interpersonal dynamics, which feels less interesting.
Yeah, Missy, you have, I know that was yay. I feel like good, excellent. Missy, do you have thoughts on that? I also have a question from the chat that I can ask you guys. But Missy, did you want to talk about that, sort of the sense of the shift in this idea of the solitary genius?
Sure. I mean, it's a myth, and even people who we perceive to be solitary geniuses, that history has painted them that way, even down to like Mozart and Da Ponte, it's
totally.
Like there's this tradition of, like I'll see when my operas are advertised, it'll be like, Proving Up by Missy Mazzoli. And I'm like, yes, I wrote all the words, I did the sets, I did the makeup, and it's like, no, it's like you have to credit at the very least the librettist up there, and it should be, I think, librettist, conductor, director, composer, on like as much material as you can. But we have this idea like from Mozart that like he did everything, and that all these other people were like in his wake of genius, and it's a myth. So I'm really about dismantling it. I'm really about my priority in hiring people. I do feel like I have power in terms of who I work with, and to that extent, I will use this myth of like the composer is the boss, but only when it comes to hiring everyone I want to work with. I'd be like, I'm the boss. And then once everyone's hired, I'm like, you guys are the boss. But I want to create a room where everyone can contribute an idea. And, whether it's like the person who's dressing the singer or the director or the sound designer, it's like, I want everyone to be able to say what they think about the thing that we're making, because the work is the boss, actually. And so that's been my criteria in hiring people. Is one of the big things is like, do you create an atmosphere where people feel free to speak, or do you create an atmosphere of fear where it's like you feel good about yourself. I'm not interested in that at all. So I think that there's a shift in the workplace, like in the arts, away from that sort of crazy making genius person, because it's impossible to work with people like that, I found.
Yeah, the work is the boss. That's great. I love that. Okay, I have a question from Scott Davis. Which companies out there are taking exciting risks with new operatic works?
I have to give a shout out to Opera Philadelphia.
Yeah, that would be number one on my list.
Yeah,
Totally.
I think that it's actually these smaller companies who have the flexibility to do more work. Everyone gets on the Met's case, but the Met is in sort of this impossible situation. They have to fill the biggest concert hall in the world, and it's tough. So yeah, I think Opera Philadelphia and Opera Omaha as well, for a company that is the only opera company in that state. They just have a really gifted director in Roger Weitz, and who's just really into bringing on young, exciting artists. I mean, that's where Lileana directed the opera that we saw, and yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, and I think that in terms of commissioning, I mean, we're seeing most of the new commissions come through smaller places for exactly what you said. And it's also, frankly, they tend to be pulling from more diverse. The smaller companies tend to be more diverse generationally, financially, culturally, class-wise. And I think it's the places that have a lot of diversity that are tending to do that. I'm trying to think of those are the two big ones, I think. Beth Morrison projects. Yeah. She's been sort of a game changer. But lots of companies, I mean, Cincinnati Opera has been commissioning work regularly. Austin has been doing there's a bunch of stuff out there, I think. We only have a few more minutes. I'm looking at we have 5 more minutes. I am going to flip, the usual question is always like, do you have advice for emerging artists? And you guys have said so many smart things. I'm going to ask this question. When you look back at yourself when you were an emerging artist or when you were younger, and I know that's always such a weird question to ask, but when you look at yourself maybe in your 20s, what were you really good at that you didn't realize at the time? That when you look at yourself now, you're like, I was good at that. What did you have then? That helped?
I feel like I just am really interested in other humans, and I think that interest and that wanting to, it's something like I want to make other people feel comfortable. So just like kind of going off what I just said about like creating a room in which people feel they can express themselves. Like I've tried to create that in every room I walk into my whole life. And I saw that at one point, I think when I was younger, I saw it as maybe a weakness. Like I wasn't tough enough or like commanding. And it's like, no, of course not. Like being nice is actually a good thing. And I also think being really super organized. There's this like myth around artists that you're wild and crazy, and that's true. But in order to get to that wild and craziness, you have to be really on top of it. So those two little things for me.
That's great. Yeah, that's super helpful. Lileana, can you think of something?
No, I agree with that. It's a hard one to follow. I mean, I remember when I was younger feeling like everybody's like, oh, you have such great energy. And I was like, what? What does that mean? Like, I'm intelligent. I have intelligent ideas. I can articulate myself amazingly. Why are you just talking about my energy? And I was like, oh, right. Because like sometimes being a director, you don't actually get to sit in other directors' rooms as much, and so you don't realize what, like you talked about it, like you walk into a room, Emma, as a director, and you can feel the chemistry of the room, and you actually have the ability to change that chemistry, right? And so when they were saying good energy, it was also like, I realized there was another way of saying like letting the room be open for that sense of play, and like when when you feel a sense of play, then you can become more playful and then discoveries happen, right? Because like that's also one of the joys of like making theater is we're adults playing make-believe. And that's like kind of amazing. And sometimes I look around, I'm like, oh right, I get to like just like make stuff up for a living. Like that's amazing, you know,
so
like
good.
we're literally like this is now a cup of wine because I said so, you know, like that's crazy. It's the like the act of like being able to imagine and then realize is like a joy, and I think that joy has stayed with me. And if I wouldn't have beat myself up so much when I was younger for that attribute, which is actually helping other people play too.
Yeah. Those I think are both beautiful things. Thank you guys so much. We're at the end of our time. I want to thank you both for all of your time. I want to thank our audience out there in the Zoom world. Octavia Driscoll is saying, thank you so much for a joyous conversation. I can't wait to see this new opera. I do not think I will be seeing it in Norway, sadly. But good luck. One of my close friends is the costume designer, so I feel like I'll get like, she'll text me photos. But it's coming to Opera Philadelphia after it's there. Is it coming for the next season?
Yes, so fall of 21, so for their sort of fall 21 festival. So in a year.
Oh my God, fall. So in a year, we will all be in Philadelphia to see that opera, which is something to look forward to. And that is an amazing thing these days. So thank you both. I'm wishing you both the best of luck as this opera unfolds and as you begin working. And oh my God, enjoy those rooms so much. What a great gift. I'm going to say goodnight to all of us. I thank you. And I think that Audrey, you are going to cut us off. I think that's right. I hope I'm doing this right.
That is correct.
Okay, great. So I'm going to say goodbye. Good night. Thank you, Missy. Thank you, Lileana. Good night, everybody. Have a fantastic week, everyone. Bye.
Bye.